I'm curious to get your thoughts. Obviously, we did this show leading into the first matchup between these two teams, and at that time, the Jags were really struggling. I believe they had lost 5 of 6 going into that game. I think they were 3-7 at that point. And since losing to the Chiefs 27-17 in that game, they won 7 of the last 8 games, and they really seem to have figured some things out. Curious. Let's start with the Jags offense. Let's talk with Trevor Lawrence, because I've shared my thoughts on him over the last couple of days on this show with Matt Miller, with Nate Taylor. And I want to get your thoughts on what Chiefs fans should be worried about and what you expect to happen, I guess, schematically, the types of routes, the types of plays, the way that they may try and attack this Chiefs defense based on what we've seen.
And it's interesting, and I don't want to be doom and gloom here, because I fully understand the Chiefs are favored in this game, and there's a reason they're favored in this game. But if we go back to the first matchup, that Week 10 game, it kind of took place right at the beginning of the ascendancy of Trevor Lawrence and the ascendancy of this team, right? 27-17, seems like the game was fairly well in hand. Keep in mind, Jags missed 2 field goals in that game, and they had a touchdown call back. It was closer than you think. And I think that schematically, looking at how Doug Pederson attacked the Spagnuolo defense in that game, and also a little bit of how he attacked the Chargers defense, they had some beaters dialed up. And I was putting together some numbers for this. The Chargers in the first half, before they chargered all over the place, they were playing a lot of cover 3, basically into every single look, 2x2, 3x1. They were playing cover 3. And they were doing their best to kind of constrain everything to the middle of the field. We're going to play outside leverage with the DBs. We're going to collision them if they're going outside. We're going to try to funnel everything inside and make Trevor Lawrence throw into a forest of hands. And it was.
And you look at the number. And if you look at the numbers, that will tell you what you want to do. He is much better throwing outside the numbers, outside the hashes, than he is down the middle of the field.
100%. And like he makes these like far hash outs look easy. Like he throws it like Pat does, where you're like, oh my God, that's insane. But there were some plays against cover 3, not an interception, but there was one where he threw a hospital ball where the safety came down and just absolutely detonated his receiver. And like that was the game plan, is force him into making those types of throws. And so then we got into the second quarter, like mid to late second quarter, and then through the rest of the game, where Pederson was like, screw it. We're going to, no more bunches, a lot less 2x2. We're going to spread them out and go like 3x1, like true spread stuff, because we want to make it as risky as possible for them to play cover 3. And we want them to get more into all of the quarters and quarter half stuff. And once they did that, they completely opened it up. They were breaking all the coverage rules of the Chargers defense. They had the play calls that, put defenders in conflict and basically gave them no-win situations. The long Zay Jones touchdown was very similar to the same play that I think the Rams ran against the Bears in the first week of the last season, which was another kind of Vic Fangio defense. They played cover 8. It was quarter, half field to the safety, or half field safety to the passing strength. They overloaded him with multiple vertical routes, and there was nobody to carry it. Literally the same play against the same coverage, nobody to carry it. The nickel let the guy go. The safety was already, outside, and there was nobody to cover Zay Jones. And I know that's a whole lot of jargon at once, but what I'm trying to say is they went 3x1. They forced them into coverages that they weren't playing as much in the first half, and then broke their own rules in order to get those touchdowns. And so I was like, okay, well, how does this apply to the Chiefs defense? The Chiefs run less cover 3 than everyone else in the league, like by far. Against 2x2 looks, I think it was like 10%. The average is about 33. So they just don't run it. They run cover 2, they run quarters, and they run man. Like those are the 3 main coverages they run. If they're going to run any middle field closed structure, it's going to be man coverage. Other than that, it's like a lot of cover 2 and quarters, a little bit of quarter, half, but mostly quarters. And so I'm like, okay, well, Doug Pederson showed in the last game and in the games leading up to it that if you're giving him 2 high safety structures, he's going to out scheme you. Like really, really well. He's going to out scheme you. And that's when I went back and looked at week 10. I was like, okay, well, let me look at every single coverage snap in cover 2 and every single coverage snap in quarters. I'm telling you, BJ, it was dialed up. Like it was there. Like Christian Kirk had a monster day, and he should have had another 100
Right.
yards on top of that. There was one big gainer against Tampa 2, where the ball got knocked down at the line of scrimmage. There was 2 more that were taken away by sacks. Like if the defensive front didn't play out of their minds in that game, Chiefs would have lost. Straight up, they would have lost. And I all this to say, schematically, I am concerned here because the Chiefs do not play the same style of defense that the Chargers played to constrain this defense. And the type of defense the Chiefs play is the exact type of defense that Doug Pederson is really good at exploiting. So, like, we need Chris Jones to play out of his mind. We need Karlaftis. We need all these edges. Like, they need to have the game of their life because schematically speaking on the back end, this favors Jacksonville, as weird as that is to say.
So if you were Spagnuolo with the schemes that they run, how would you set it up to not lead yourself into a situation? Because all the things that we're talking about, I'm assuming Steve Spagnuolo knows this. They know Doug Pederson. They can look at the film from last week. What would you do differently?
I would,
besides tell Chris Jones to have the game of his life.
I would break tendencies and run cover 3 seam. I really would. Which means, against 3-by-1, depending on who's at the number 3 spot on the inside, I would have different cover 3 checks depending on how they're lined up. If Christian Kirk is the number 3 inside, which they love to put him as the number 3 inside, I would probably, keep the strong safety carrying the vertical from number 2, and then have the free safety come down and kind of nail down on the number 3. So I guess we'll just call that quarters. It'll play out. 3 seam against trips can be kind of funky where it looks a lot like quarters. But there's different ways to run cover 3 against that. Like even the Chargers did that a couple snaps. I really wish they stuck with it. I think they kind of got scared out of it a little bit. But you got to run more cover 3 is what I'm trying to say. Like there's different ways to do it against trips, and they got to do it. Because if they don't, I have genuine concern that the deep middle of the field will be picked apart.
All right. This is my next question. Is if you're a Chiefs fan, you're watching and you're sitting here listening and you're talking about those 2 high looks pre-snap, somebody doesn't understand the game at your level. What can they be watching for to understand some of the things that you're talking about as far as those 2 high looks? You're talking about the seam, the middle of the field is going to get attacked if they do what you're telling them you don't think they should, which is set it up for Doug Pederson to be able to attack cover 2. That's easy to see with the 2 high look. What other things can people look for pre-snap to give an indication of whether or not they're breaking tendencies or playing, cover 3 and those types of things?
If you're on the broadcast angle and you see that the 2 safeties are high, but you see one is at like 12 yards and one's at 10 yards, something funky's happening and one's going to roll down. Or if they're even, but you see one of them kind of leaning forward a little bit before the snap, one of them, even if he's not explicitly coming down into the hook or, hauling ass to get out to the curl, sometimes they'll just kind of sit there at about a 10-yard depth and just wait because they know that that's where the curl zone would have been anyway, or the hook zone would have been anyway. So they'll wait for the defense to form and mold around them. So just kind of like watch their stance, watch how deep they are, because I do think that Spags is a smart coach. He will break tendencies if he needs to. I think they're going to call it more in this game because that's what worked last week. And I think that's what you should look at. Just look at the safeties and how they're standing and how deep they're standing.